I've run out of number-related puns for Max Verstappen wins because apparently Sweet 16 was the limit and he's just gone one beyond it. Welcome back to Motorsport 101. In brighter news, at least 17 is my birthday number, so maybe that's something. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode... It's something. Welcome to episode 482 of Motorsport 101. Glad you could join us as ever. This is going to be an episode all about F1's Brazilian Grand Prix, the fan favourite round, one of the best rounds of the year. And this race didn't quite deliver in that aspect, at least, but it was certainly newsworthy, and that's worth talking about at the least. And look, let's put it to you this way. We had a literal fucking storm hit the side of the track on Friday evening, and we barely even get the chance to talk about it besides this intro sequence. So
Rip the entire roof off a grandstand.
As you do.
You know, it's amazing when Leclerc was talking about he could hear the rain, but it wasn't raining yet, which must be absolutely terrifying as a racing driver.
that is nightmare fuels. Like, you're driving a race car at 210 miles an hour, and you can hear there's rain in the area, but it's dry on track. How are you meant to push in those circumstances?
Keep in mind as well, Formula One cars might not be as loud as they used to be, but they are anything but quiet.
Oh, exactly. And wow. If you haven't seen the footage already, there's a fantastic transition clip that F1 put on its social media reels of Verstappen driving in Q1 and then seeing the lights go out when Q3 hits, when the storm was on top of him. It's like someone's patched in a night mode mod into an F1 game. It's crazy.
There's the still shot of him completing his Q3 lap, which would be eventually become the pole lap for that exact reason. And it is like he's driving into the night. It's just a wall of black in the sky.
Yeah,
I hear you on both these accounts, but the hardest image of the weekend is George Russell standing out in the middle of the rain, looking up to the skies, thinking, "God, what did I do to deserve this?"
It's like a raining version of R. Kelly's old "I Believe I Can Fly" video. It's which unfortunately I kind of redacted for understandable reasons, but even so, like that was quite.
Wait, what did
image.
he do? What did he do to deserve that rain, or what did he do to deserve that car?
6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But first
We'll get into that later.
First of all, let's introduce our colleagues as ever, because you probably have already noticed by now, for the first time in a couple of weeks, welcome back, Mr. Cameron Buckley. Hello, sir.
Back from injured reserve and now injured on the play. I am not doing great, folks. Sinus infections are a bitch, especially when you can't get access to antibiotics to blow them out of your system.
Yeah, not fun. There's a guy that had 2 chest infections from 2 flights he's had to America this year. Those are
You're
bitches. Like, I came to America thinking America would love me. America did not love me back.
No, well,
it tried.
For that reason, you know, I am happy to be back. I've had a lot of things to say, and I've basically had to just write them down angrily in either our own Discord or the Jimmy Broadbent Discord. And if I'm a little quiet on this episode, y'all understand why.
Exactly. And also joining us, who's done an admirable job filling in for the last couple of weeks, finally back home, RJ O'Connell. Hello, buddy.
I've been back for a little bit, actually. I think this is my last time out on the road, barring any sudden Christmas or Thanksgiving travel, because it is that time of year. The holidays are coming up. It's time for pleasant and or awkward and or tense interactions with your family, depending on how your situation is. No judgment either way. All the fall sports are back in action, and with them, all the discourse that comes around with them. And of course, it's almost the end of racing season. Golly, it feels like it just started.
Yeah, we finished up WEC. We finished up Super GT. We finished up NASCAR this past weekend as well.
Yeah, congratulations to Ryan Blaney, your new NASCAR Series champion. Which that was look, we all love Ryan Blaney on here, so we're all delighted for him to win the title. The House of Bubba Wallace greatly approves on that one. It was a genuinely great race to close it out as well, so that's always fun. Relatively clean as well, no funny business, which is always a plus.
Yeah, because the NASCAR truck race was For those of you out there,
Shambolic.
don't seek this race out. Don't think about this race beyond the words I have for it. It was one of the most shameful displays I have ever seen in professional motorsport.
It's
If
like
they ran that finale, if they ran that finale at Bowman Gray, you would not be able to tell a difference.
It's like that sequence where Vinny and Brian Alvarez go through like every negative adjective they could find to describe a wrestling pay-per-view all in quick succession in like 15 seconds. That's the description of that Phoenix race.
That was me in our own Discord.
Awful,
in our events chat.
awful, shambolic, terrible, devoid of merit.
Devoid of merit, I think, is the perfect descriptor. Also, shout outs, RJ.
Yeah.
We have a new Japan double champion.
That's right. We talked about Ritomo Miyata winning the Super Formula title last week, and with his third win alongside Shosuboi, who's now a two-time champion, Ritomo Miyata is now the fifth driver to win both the GT500 title and Super GT and the Super Formula / Japanese Top Formula Championship in the same calendar year, and at 24 years of age, he is the youngest.
Let's go! We love to see it. You know, we said goodbye to the NSX as a racing car for the time being. And if it couldn't be them because Arda were pants at Motegi, then I am perfectly okay with the Tom's Toyota, the traditional Tom's Toyota, bringing home the crown.
Good times, and wonderful news to hear about that as well. It is kind of strange. We're in the back stretch. Motorsport for the year is done in 3 weeks. For those who don't know the calendar, we've got a MotoGP triple header to close out the season that starts this weekend at Sepang. Sepang, Qatar, Valencia to close out the year there, and then on, which we'll get to hopefully a little bit of that later this week, and then on two wheels you've got just the two F1 races left. Vegas next weekend.
Did you hear we're going to Vegas?
Oh, they didn't promote it at all. They didn't immediately mention Vegas moments after Brazil finished. No. And we've also obviously got Abu Dhabi to close out the year in a couple of weeks' time. So yeah, we'll be done in just under a month from now. We're in November. We are in the home stretch. And it feels like it because I'm fucking tired. I'm not going to lie to you people. Don't work 14-hour days in the middle of an F1 triple header. It's not fun. I promise you, it's not the easiest. But nevertheless, let's get into Formula One's Brazilian Grand Prix in just a moment. But places you can find us real quick. We are on Twitter at motorsport_101. We're on Instagram at motorsport101pod. You can check out our website, motorsport101.com. If you want some bonus thoughts on Formula One in Brazil, written by yours truly, you can check that out over there. You can follow us personally on Twitter if you like, at Dre_WTF1, at CBuckley917, and at RJ O'Connell. And if you really like us, you can back us financially on Patreon, patreon.com/motorsport101. If you back us at the $5 level, you can get early access to all of our episodes before they go live to the public. If you can upgrade that to the $10 tier, as Andrew Bannister did today. So thank you, Andrew.
Let's go!
Welcome to our humble abode. We appreciate you.
For upping your pledge to $10. You can just listen to these shows. Loves are being recorded. Andrew, if you listen to this show, please reach out to me somewhere on the internet if you want to get access to our Discord server as well. We'd love to have you. And that goes to anybody that backs us on Patreon at any level. But if you back us at $10 a month level, you get access to the Supporters Club, where you get extra chat, extra content, inside information from all of us as well, which is kind of fun. And you can listen to the episodes live as they're being recorded. So do check that out as well. Right, so without further ado, let's get into the Brazilian Grand Prix.
I thought it was the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, but it's the Brazilian Grand Prix. But it's officially the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, but it's the Brazilian Grand Prix. I would have said it's the Sao Paulo Grand Prix because but we're out of the Bolsonaro reign of terror. So it should be the Brazilian Grand Prix, but it's the Sao Paulo
whatever they
Grand
call
Prix.
it. Whatever they call it this year.
Yeah, basically.
At this year's race at Interlagos, it was, surprise, surprise, another comfortable weekend for Max Verstappen. who doubled up with his 4th sprint win of the season and his 17th Grand Prix victory of 2023, with Lando Norris surprisingly hanging on to his coattails close behind. But the real headline during the race was the knockdown drag-out fight between Fernando Alonso and Sergio Perez for the final spot on the podium, with Alonso nipping him to 3rd by 53 milliseconds over the line. We'll address the bigger storylines in this race, but first up, Lando Norris.
I think it's safe to say that at this point, he's having the best run of his life in Formula One at the moment. He's been driving on a freakish level for quite some time where, I mean, if Brazil established anything that we didn't already know, it's that Lando Norris is at the front of the queue when it comes to Max Verstappen right now. If everything clicks for this McLaren and in Lando's hands, he's going to finish second because he's done that 4 times in the last 6 races and 5 podiums in the last 6. He's probably going to finish 4th in the Drivers' Championship as well, given that is a remarkable accomplishment, given, and I did the digging on this, before Austria, the first 8 race weekends of the year, Lando had 12 points. And he was
McLaren had a total of 17.
With that, a total of 17. They've scored 270 in the 12 weekends since then.
We had a kind of an at-length discussion before Austria in our Discord between myself and a few other of the members in there. And we were thinking back, and we have a couple really, technically minded historians when it comes to, top flight motorsport. And really, we were thinking back of the great upgrade packages that we've seen in F1, and McLaren's had a couple of them. But this one almost beggars belief how it flipped them from pound for pound the worst team in Formula One to pound for pound maybe the best.
This is a team that was nowhere to start the year. Their brakes were melted in pre-season testing. Aston Martin had stolen all their headlines as the informed team of the test, and McLaren were nowhere to be seen. We actually genuinely made videos talking about how bad McLaren had been in testing at WTF1, but this was back in February. And now McLaren is genuinely challenging Red Bull for the win. Norris didn't really have a clear-cut chance to win this, but he was always in play and was always in range the whole way through. If Max
Red Bull had to look over their shoulder.
Yeah, Red Bull couldn't just pull away and win this one comfortably. Like a bad pit stop, and Norris would have been right in range. That's what it was like for at least 2/3 of this race.
A bad pit stop. What were Max Verstappen's times on his pit stops during this race?
2.2 and 2.4.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Safe to say Kota was a blip.
Yeah, and I mean, some of that quality health right there. I mean, in your words, it's the hope that gets you, because Lando did actually have a legitimate lunge at Max on lap 8. Got into DRS. Max had to go defensive into turn 4. Thankfully, kept it him and Norris both on the road this time, unlike a couple years ago.
Didn't open up the steering. That tends to be the key for you, Max.
But it appeared at the same time that he was close all race, at the same time it feels like Max said, all right, you've had your fun, and he punched him out of DRS in a sector.
Yeah, immediately. That was it, basically.
And then more or less hold him at arm's length for the rest of the race. Nothing like the setup problems that Red Bull had here last year. They absolutely hammered the field across the weekend. But Norris is about as close as anyone has been, and he's been doing it across enough weekends that if Red Bull does slip up, you'd think that he is the candidate, because Aston Martin, we'll talk about them a little bit more in a bit, but this was their first good weekend in months. And for Mercedes and Ferrari, they can't get out of Brazil fast enough. And again, I cannot put it into words. McLaren were the pits coming out of preseason. And that was validated in the first 8 races of the season. And conversely, they've been the consistent, at worst, usually third best team, often second, since Austria. And the turnaround has been phenomenal. And this is without their new wind tunnel. This car is still, in aerodynamic terms, a Toyota in a certain way. Because this is still being built.
It's built in Cologne.
Yeah, aerodynamically, this car is still 100% from the Toyota wind tunnel, that old girl. Still doing work over in WEC. But Lando's been so solid. And not just the speed, but also the racecraft, because he is one of the only people who can kind of mitigate the McLaren, which is still not a perfect car. Their tire wear is still bad. And Lando can at least get them into the range where they're only kind of getting killed by Red Bull on tires rather than the rest of the field who are just being blown away.
Well, I've always been impressed by Lando Norris's racecraft ever since he got in the sport. Like, you rarely think of like, okay, yes, there's a very, very big one, but that was more down to a conflict between driver and pit wall that cost him that Russian Grand Prix victory. But apart from that, you know, I generally never have a complaint with Lando Norris. We've always talked about he's always been able to get the most out of his car in any given weekend.
I mean...
Yeah, I was going to make the point. Yeah. This is year 5 for Lando in F1. He's not had a bad season since he got here. And... the only person that's really given him a fair run for his money is Carlos Sainz, and we all know Carlos Sainz is a quality driver, and he had a bucket load of extra experience by comparison when they were teammates. That was kind of natural that Carlos would be a bit stronger, but you're absolutely like Lando is becoming one of the most complete drivers in Formula One, and Cam's absolutely right. Like, McLaren's big weakness has been tyre wear in the back end of a stint. We've seen that in races like Hungary and Japan.
I mean, we even saw it here a little bit because, you'd see Max, and Max was clearly in the first stint kind of just maintaining, other than when he had one push lap to punch Lando out of DRS, and then it just grew a little bit and a little bit.
Just
and it's usually, if I look at the trend, it's usually a lap. I don't know. Depends on the track. About halfway through a stint, the field just starts hemorrhaging time to Red Bull, and specifically Max, because Max can kind of just get whatever lap time he wants out of the car, and the car doesn't burn the tires out. Even if it isn't quite the weapon of mass destruction in qualifying, it absolutely is in race trim.
Yeah, and that's how it's been all year long, essentially. Red Bull will load their car with understeer and protect their rear tyres better in the race by doing it that way. We've seen it all year, and this was a less extreme example of that, but Norris was good enough where he was only losing maybe a tenth or two a lap as opposed to maybe 4 or 5 earlier on in this season. McLaren has absolutely made gains, and like this, for me, outside of Qatar, which we all know was a bit of an outlier because of the way the tyre management stints had to be managed, this was probably the nearest anybody has been able to run Max all season in terms of a clean race.
He was only on average, and it is skewed a bit by the tire stints, but he was only about a tenth and some change behind Max across the course of the race.
That's
now the big, compared to where everyone else has been this year, no one else has gotten that close or has been in position to get that close. And I mean, Lando did kind of flub qualifying. Well, he made up for it with the start of the gods on Sunday's race.
He had to get around the Aston Martin rolling roadblock first, but then gained 4 places off one corner by going second into turn 1, and then we very quickly got a safety car and a red flag, which for reasons we'll get to later on. But no, like this did all round, like there's a lot to like about this McLaren package. In terms of ultimate speed, they are right there with Red Bull. They're not a million miles away in terms of tyre wear. Now, they've certainly improved in that aspect as well. And they have a quality driver with Norris spearheading the team. And I mentioned in my DRR post about this, when Oscar Piastri gets the flyaway rounds down, they've got 2 quality drivers in that team, because in terms of raw speed, he's right there with Lando. He's really not far behind.
Piastri's been a revelation this season because he lacks the finer details of Lando, but you would expect that. He's a rookie.
Yeah.
When he gets that tire wear under control,
that's another thing we want to talk about too. Is Oscar Piastri is a little overrated. He's had the sprint win, and obviously people are wanting to lash onto that and saying that this.
I don't think he's overrated at all.
For a rookie, for a first-year driver in the situation
for a first-year driver to be on raw speed, giving Lando something to think about, and he's one of 2 people to record anything but a loss stat against Red Bull this year. That's pretty good. That's damn good.
Yeah, absolutely. Out of all the teams that are in that upper midfield fight right now, McLaren are clearly in the best position to make a run, in my opinion.
I don't think it's any coincidence that the 2 most similar cars on the grid at this point, the Red Bull and the McLaren, are the ones who are seeming to streak a little bit further ahead the further we get into the season. Fortunately, the thing to remind us, the thing that we need to keep in mind at this stage of the season, Red Bull hasn't upgraded this car in months.
Yeah.
And they are still folding the field on race day.
Yeah, Christian Horner admitted last week that Red Bull's cost cap penalty is over. It is done. They've gone through their 12-month period, and they've already admitted they've spent pretty much all of that wind tunnel time towards next year's car.
It's one of the least upgraded cars in the field because, well, they just haven't needed to.
Yeah. So, this is the field playing catch up on a car that has been frozen in place essentially since the summer break. This is F1. It's a game of diminishing returns. It always has been. So it's not a surprise that the field has closed the gap somewhat. But we'll see what happens when the start of next season kicks off. I mean, moving on for a moment here, because we got to talk about, for me, the highlight of the race. One of the highlights of the season. For me, one of the highlights of the season so far. How good was that, Lando? So how good was that Fernando Perez fight? Because, my goodness, that was fun.
Fantastic.
That was... And good to see Sergio actually show up. It's been a hot minute. And especially after the Mexico Lap 1 disaster, which, thank God for him, I was not on last week's show. Thanking his lucky stars. But, Fernando Alonso... Still him after all these years.
It's incredible. I have a question, though. What the hell is this Aston Martin team? We were just talking last week about, that they've completely ruined everything. And so naturally they respond with a 3rd and 5th place finish after getting rid of all the upgrades they just invested to put in the car at Coda.
Arguably their best weekend of the year.
That is the most backhanded compliment I think we can give is you have wasted your entire WOD developmentally. You've wasted all of your additional wind tunnel time from when you were lower in the constructors. But your base car is still really good. So when you take all the upgrades off, it's still one of the best cars in the field on its day.
Yeah,
we've spent the entire WOD on these upgrades and we've wasted them. We thought November was just not a thing anymore.
Yeah, I did a podcast with Mo Mahad from Pit Stop Fracas for Hot Takes Wednesday last week, and I literally said on that show, it says to me that Aston Martin fundamentally do not understand their car because their base car was really good. They've tried to upgrade it, and ever since they've tried to upgrade it, they've fallen back down the order. They've reverted spec, and they're back to where they were again, where they're arguably the 2nd or 3rd best team on the grid. Like, what are you doing here? It highlights. For me, like I talked about with RJ on last week's show, it highlights what this team could have been because they're going to end up 5th, almost certainly in the Constructors' Championship, barring a miracle at this point. And that doesn't track with how good they have been for arguably, half the season where they were the 2nd best team in the sport. Fernando Alonso had 8 podiums.
On raw pace, they were basically the 2nd fastest car every race until Hungary.
And that was the one they thought they were going to win.
Because we thought they were going to win Monaco, and they didn't.
They should have won Monaco.
They should have won Monaco. They blew it. They blew it strategically. That was their chance. And I think it highlights that I think a big thing that it highlights with them, and not understanding their car is an element to it. Again, the Aston is not a Red Bull clone. That narrative needs to die. I think the closest thing to a clone right now is the McLaren. See how well it's working for them. I think it highlights how young their technical structure is, because this team has only really been together a year and some change. And it doesn't seem like they got the base car right. It seems like their development pipeline, much like we used to talk about Ferrari quite a lot, and we still do talk about Ferrari because, oh my God, they were bad this weekend. Their development pipeline is not with the likes of Red Bull and Mercedes, and right now McLaren.
Yeah, they're still catching up in terms of resources as well, because they've poured a lot. They're
still a midfield team.
Yeah,
a lower midfield team overall.
Yeah, this is a Racing Point team that went bankrupt 2 years ago, or 3 years ago. Let's not forget. Like, this is a team that's still getting back on its feet from all of that, and they've spent tens of millions of pounds upgrading their facilities, and which aren't fully finished yet. They're not going to be done until the middle of next year.
They're not reaping the benefits of that yet.
No, like it's going to be at least another year before they're fully up to speed of where they're at as a team. It doesn't stop this from being an excellent season and a sign of what could be down the road. But it's going to be a little bit disappointing when you look at the final score sheet and go, wait, we were fifth after all of this?
I mean, if I'm the technical department of a Formula One team, I'd almost much rather start the year poorly and develop well rather than the other way around. Because if all of this development time that was put into this Aston, all of it was worthless because the upgrades were actually not upgrades, well, what does that say about their 24 car?
Good question.
Because if all of that simulation data was bad, and all of that simulation data is being fed into that 24 car, good luck.
Good luck. I mean, the Aston Martin are in a very weird place, but for that very reason, it's what's led us to such a fantastic fight. I mean, looking at it, Sergio Perez underplayed his qualifying hand again. Stop us if you've had that one before this year. But he did do a decent job of picking off the field where he could. He got up to Alonso, and I was good. I was under the assumption he was just going to roll past Fernando quickly, but Fernando was able to hold Perez behind him for the whole second stint of that race, and the whole third stint was
shapes.
Yeah, and the whole third stint was Perez basically hanging around Alonso's DRS range and trying to figure out a way past him, and he didn't. Like, Alonso was money coming out of the final corner and money enough in turn 2 where he was able to defend himself into those key braking zones, and Perez was getting more and more frustrated trying to figure out a way past. 2 laps to go, he dumps his entire battery in one final all-out assault to try and get past him. Actually makes it stick. And then Alonso on the final lap was able to stay with him. He goes all in and sweeps around the outside into turn 4. It was an incredible pass for third place. To have the bravery to dump your whole battery into turn 4 and sweep across the front of Perez's car because you know you can outbrake him into the corner. Sensational driving from Fernando Alonso. My goodness me.
And very hard, but very fair racing between them.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Much. I don't know if it's one of his all-time best drives, but given the context of what we were just talking about earlier this season, where Aston Martin looks like they are on the ropes, completely lost their way. Third place is a great result, and that's a pretty solid drive from a driver, again, who is 42 years old and looks like he could do this until he's 50.
And I want to give the man his flowers because Lance Stroll had his best weekend in a long, long time. Only 6 seconds down on Fernando at the end of the day.
My frustration... fifth place. My frustration with him lately is not that he is completely capable of doing this stuff, because he is, but he never does it consistently.
The man is the definition of streaky.
He is a streaky driver, but credit where credit is due. He got his head down and he drove well this weekend, and that's all. That performance is exactly what we've been asking of Stroll all year long. Do that, and no one's going to have a problem with you. We don't expect you to beat Fernando Alonso. We expect you to stay with him, and that's what he did this weekend. So fair play to him in that regard, at least. What I would say on top of that is, great Fernando, again, 0.053 over the line, about 3/4 of a car length at 200 miles an hour when they hit the line. Also, Sergio Perez, step in the right direction this weekend, certainly. What I would also say is 34 seconds off your teammate and losing a fight to an Aston Martin is still probably not going to convince anybody who are out for you.
No. And in fairness with his qualifying, not all his fault, because when the sky was falling down upon the track, Oscar Piastri lost it in front of him and meant that he basically didn't have a Q3 time.
He was very cheeky in saying that he would have been on the front row if it wasn't for the yellow flag. I had the tracing data for that lap. It was probably around P5, but
knowing the Red Bull, he would have gained a bit down the main straight because, well, some cars were built for this main straight, and some cars weren't.
Does that transition us nicely towards the next segment? Because we were talking about this because this is a big element of this race. It was a rough day for the teams fighting for second in the standings. Charles Leclerc had his second career DNS, did not start after suffering an electronics failure on the formation lap, while Carlos Sainz had to nurse a faulty gearbox home in the other car in 7th. Across the aisle at Mercedes, they had to park George Russell for his oil temperature overheating on his power unit, and both he and Lewis struggled all weekend long to manage their tyres, with Lewis only finishing 8th, which is the worst race finish Hamilton has had all season. Who had the worst day, gentlemen?
Dre, before we get started, Dre, I need to call you out on something, because last week on your other job, the WTF1 podcast, you brought someone who clearly had no idea what he was talking about when at the end of the show, he said in confidence that if any race was going to be the race for Lewis Hamilton to finally snap that 2-year winless drought, it was going to be this one, because he always does well at Interlagos and Mercedes won here on merit. Clearly, that guy didn't know what he's talking about. What kind of clown would say such a thing?
RJ O'Connell?
Rory James O'Connell is what my notes say here.
Doctor, I am Pagliacci.
Don't, you son of a bitch, don't make me laugh. It hurts. Is it bad to say yes?
No, in this instance, ironically. I mean, for me, and this is how I look at it, Mercedes were dreadful, and Mercedes kind of compounded all of their major problems of the last 2 years into one weekend. A combination of, one, having to raise their car higher off the ground because they didn't want a repeat of Austin's disqualification, having to run the biggest rear wing they had to try and mitigate their loss of downforce, and then, as a result, 3, making their car a lot more draggy because it was the slowest car in a straight line. They were losing, I think, 7 miles an hour to the Red Bulls in the speed traps. Put all that together with butchered tyres, and you have this weekend for Mercedes.
Dre, maybe the zero pods were the right choice.
Shut the fuck up, Buckley.
Maybe you do need a wind tunnel to see that, but Toto Wolff called this after the race, quote, "Personally, that was our worst weekend in 13 years.
How many times is he going to say that over the last 2 years?
Did he forget Spain 2016 never happened? I mean, to be fair, I would too.
Hey, at least they were fast.
Yeah, that's true for 15 seconds.
They went out of that race faster than any other car.
Normally when a man brags about being fast for 15 seconds, it normally involves a round of crying afterwards. But, I mean, to be fair, was probably what they were doing after this race too. This was rough. And Mercedes had basically stacked all their problems on top of each other in the space of one weekend.
George Russell was having the worst fucking time because I wasn't watching the race, but I always get notifications from our work chat, and it felt like every 5 minutes I would get a new notification for somebody who's listening to the radio that says, George complaining about something. George isn't happy about the car. George is tuned into KEMO 106.3 radio.
I mean, look,
Dude.
like, for me, it's when Lewis got drag raced up the front straight by an Alpine.
An Alpine which could not pass a Haas with the assistance of DRS for several laps at Mexico City.
An Alpine, which we know is anywhere between 30 to 40 horsepower down on the whole field right now, and run their downforce stripped down at most tracks to compensate for that. I mean, I don't know how much of it was raising the floor, because the way Toto put it, their cars, and it's the same problem as last year, albeit without the ass pounding that the W13 tended to do. It's just got such a narrow operating window. And if you raise it even a millimeter or two, it just loses all of its downforce. And then you need to bolt on a huge rear wing. And then you still don't have any downforce, because Red Bull took the same approach this weekend. Only their car has such a wide operating window that they can bolt on the Monaco rear wing, bolt on all the wing that they can muster. Well, the Honda engine's still going to punch it through the air better than just about anything on the grid.
Mm-hmm.
And the car makes so much downforce that it then does protect its tires. Mercedes ended up with the worst of all worlds this weekend, because they bolted on as much downforce as they had in their arsenal, and the car just shredded the tires anyway.
Yeah,
nothing to fight with.
It just didn't matter. Their ultimate speed wasn't bad. We saw them hold off the Red Bulls in the sprint very briefly, but once the tire wear kicked in, they couldn't stay with them. They the
tires lasted 3 laps in the sprint, Dre.
Yeah, the stat that came up was that George Russell had lost an average of 1.3 seconds per lap in the sprint. That's how badly he butchered his tires. Like George, he might as well have bought one of Elon Musk's old flamethrowers and just taken them to a set of Pirellis, and it would have done less damage than what he was doing out there on track.
I mean, there's a legitimate argument you can make that had we not lost Leclerc and Piastri effectively very early on,
and maybe even Ricciardo as well.
And Ricciardo had phenomenal pace, but unfortunately caught a tire to the back wing during the lap 1 incident. There's an argument you can make. Mercedes did not have the speed for points on merit this weekend. This race, which they dominated the last 2 years.
They won here last year. On merit, no shenanigans, no funny business. They won this race last year. No questions asked. And
they were debatably the 6th fastest car here this year.
Yeah. And even that, we've mocked Ferrari at times earlier on this year for being in that sort of ballpark. At least someone like Carlos Sainz, when he had the 6th best car at Zandvoort, still scored solid points that day. Simply by keeping his nose dry and not fucking up. It's worth something. But, you're absolutely right, Cam. Toto admitted that, look, I don't care. He said in the interview but after the race, he said, look, I don't care that George Russell's car didn't make it. I'm more concerned he probably wouldn't have scored points if he was still out there. That's what concerned it.
And it's the same carryover from last year. Because, I mean, last year, Red Bull screwed the setup on a sprint weekend. And Ferrari's engine, which we'll get to in a moment, kept blowing itself up at high altitude if they didn't turn it down. But it's just this deep-reaching fundamental flaw in this generation of Mercedes. Where they could swim. I mean, they were clearly second fastest in Mexico all the way through the race. And Lewis had the pace to reel off a fast lap and maintain himself. They were second fastest in Coda, legally or not legally. And then this weekend, they're scrapping for points. And they don't seem to understand why.
That's the thing that extended to me when I was reading the transcripts and reading the interviews. They were talking about it. Toto himself admitted he hasn't got the magic screw that's going to fix everything. The impression that I get is that they don't know what's causing these issues and they don't know how to fix it. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of their car.
And that extends however far until they can figure out that issue. I mean, they came into this season talking shit on the socials, bringing back the black car. They wrote off the season after Bahrain. Such was the evisceration at Red Bull's hands they undertook.
If memory serves, Hamilton was 50 seconds off the winning car in Bahrain.
I mean, and this car has changed so much since then. It's gained side pods. They've completely redesigned their floor. They've completely redesigned their front suspension, parts of their rear suspension. They've modified their power unit as much as they can under the engine freeze.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, on weekends like this, they're no closer. If anything, they're further away. They got curb stomped by 2 of their customer teams this weekend.
Yeah.
This and Aston Martin, which has effectively had no development, worthwhile development at least, since the start of the season. This Mercedes is practically a D-spec car, and the team that buys half of their car just blew them into the weeds.
Absolutely.
Lance Stroll drag raced Lewis Hamilton like his engine blew.
Yeah, just a cornucopia of horse shit. And then you go to Ferrari.
And we haven't gotten a Ferrari yet.
Oh boy. You know what? As I was going through the updates for the race before we were about to leave, I said to my partner, so how long do you think Charles Leclerc's last race lasted today? And I told her, didn't even make it to the first lap.
It didn't last. It never started.
Yeah, the answer is 0. The answer is like minus 45 seconds. Yeah, I mean,
what is this? What is Charles? He can't. If he didn't have bad luck, he'd have no luck at all.
Fun fact, I spent today writing a video script for WTF1 saying, is Charles Leclerc the unluckiest driver in Formula 1? It was 1,500 words long. To put it into perspective, this was rough for Charles. And, I mean, again, Fred Vassar said that it wasn't necessarily hydraulics. They were very cautious about saying exactly what it was. He said it may have been an electronics issue.
It was electronics that shut down the hydraulics and the power unit. And then
the electronics again.
Yeah, because this is what killed his car back in Bahrain when he was on for a surefire podium.
Which ruined 2 of his race weekends.
Yeah, because that destroyed his power unit. We don't actually know what the knock-on effect is going to be with this, but then he restarted the car because you can effectively hybrid start these things now. Use the MGUK as a makeshift starter motor, and the issue just reoccurred.
Jump cords.
What is this, a Range Rover? Might as well be the most unreliable car in the world is still the most unreliable car in the world. Because is it better or worse for your cars and the cars you power to have 4 separate mechanical DNFs across a race day?
Kevin Magnussen's was not mechanical, I can tell you that.
No, it wasn't. But both of the Alfa Romeos were mechanical, power unit related. Charles Leclerc had the catastrophic electronics failure, and Carlos Sainz had downshift problems finishing up the end of this race, which cost him a chance at any more progress.
Nico Hulkenberg probably had the cleanest race out of the 6 Ferrari-powered drivers today.
The cleanest race, which involved him getting sandwiched and battered into by his teammate Anna Williams.
Second time he's been sandwiched in the last 4 rounds. Well, if Nico Hulkenberg didn't have bad luck, he'd have no luck at all. No, it's this, and I say Ferrari had the worst day, and the reason why I say Ferrari had the worst day was that this was an open goal for Ferrari to hit Merckx where it hurt in the constructors' fight. There was 24 points between them going into this race weekend. Now, this is still a minor dub for Ferrari. The gap's down to 20, but this could have been a lot more. This could have been a lot more, and they've only got 2 rounds left. It's going to take a miracle now for Ferrari to make up those 20 points, because Merckx, on paper, have about the same quality of race car. It's going to take something. It's going to take a big swing between now and the end of the year for Ferrari to make up 20 points on Merckx. That's how I look at it anyway.
They're going to need Mercedes to effectively not score, and they effectively didn't score this race. So, of course, Leclerc, who was starting second, and the pace wasn't awful this weekend for Leclerc.
No.
There's a reasonable chance he could have been on the podium. Race doesn't even start.
No.
He can't buy luck these days.
No, and a third place is 15 points. It would
That's
be
doable.
It would
Across
be
2 more weekends, that's super doable, Dre.
It's at that point, it's a drag race between the two of them for the line. It'd be 5 points going into Vegas, and Vegas, we don't know what the hell's going to happen. So, yeah, I mean, this was a big open goal for Ferrari, and they missed it. Look, Fred, say what you will about Ferrari's season, and I'm generally sympathetic towards Fred Vassar because he's had to clean up a lot of Binotto's bullshit that he left behind. Second place would actually be a pretty decent salvage job for Ferrari, all things considered. I
mean, look at it like this, Trey. 2022 Mercedes scored 515 points.
Mm-hmm.
What, they came out of yesterday in the 380s.
Yeah,
the second place teams have been just left in the weeds.
Yeah, Mercs are significantly worse than what they were last year. Ferrari are probably a little bit better overall, especially in the back half of the year.
I don't know if I go that far. The second half of the year, sure. The first half last year. Half.
Yeah, like they've been better in the back half of the year, but a lot of that has been, again, trying to take a card out of Red Bull's book by whacking understeer on their car to stop him being an erratic motherfucker that was trying to kill its drivers every other week. So yeah, like it's a bit of a 6-1 off doesn't it, the other sort of situation here. I think Ferrari's a little bit better. I think Mercedes are a little bit worse, but you know, Mercs, if they came out of this year third, it would be an unmitigated disaster for them, in my humble opinion. Given the amount, the amount of resources they've thrown at this, the amount of money they've got, the amount of employees this is the same Merc team that are pumping £70 million into revamping Brackley as well, and they're going to come out third.
This is the Mercedes Formula One team that employs 7-time drivers champion of the world Lewis Hamilton and triple S platinum tier prospect George Russell. And they don't really have a lot to show for it. Ferrari employ
over
generational sensation Charles Leclerc and the highest floor guy in the sport with still a pretty decent ceiling in Carlos Sainz Jr., and they have nothing to show for it. So at the end of the day, you see it this weekend. The whole field is compressing, and the two teams that you'd expect to take the fight to Red Bull are fucking nowhere.
Yeah. It's the team that was sick through 8 rounds this year that have posed the biggest threat to them in the back half of the year. Constantly.
Not every elevator's going up, Dre.
No, and that is a categoric failure by the technical departments in Brackley and Maranello.
Absolutely. And they should be raked over the coals for it. I mean, there's already been consequences. I mean, Fred Vass has already spent most of the year cleaning up Binotto's mess. And Mike Elliott's now gone from Mercedes altogether from the end of the year. And Allison had to come back to run the day-to-day run-ins of that team from a technical standpoint. And we know Allison's one of the best in the business, but he's got a lot of shit to clean up.
I mean, Dre, Mike Elliott was one of the best in the business. Because regardless of the witch hunt from that fan base on social media, he also helped architect W's 9 through 12 constructors championship winning cars.
Yeah,
often in complete dick flattening fashion.
All 4 of those cars you mentioned won the constructors championship.
It's like how
3 of them at a canter.
It's like how in basketball, Mike Budenholzer coaches the Milwaukee Bucks to an NBA championship. And then this past season, the Bucks fall way short of expectations, and he's sacked from the team and has no prospects of coming back to the league anytime soon.
And the Bucks look exactly the same this year. They just added Damian Lillard, which worked out for 2 games.
There's only one kind of Dame time that we respect. Shout out to Michelle Gadding, Sarah Bovey, and Rahel Frey. Getting that dub in the last ever GT race.
Iron fucking dames. Hell to the yes. Like, yeah, fantastic achievement for them to win the final GT race as we know it in the WEC. Second
it is
championship
the last GT race. That category has now retired. It is all GT3s from here on out in the World Endurance Championship. Iron Dames will be back with the GT3 car, which is cool, but like they want to win this one, and nobody else can win another race to defeat them in these spec of cars.
Lineal champs.
That's the permanent lineal champions, cannot be beaten. That's the only damn time we respect around here at Motorsport 101.
Hell yeah.
Oh yeah.
Congrats to them. Quick before we get out of here as well, we want to talk a little bit about the sprint as well, because this was the last sprint of the year in Brazil. Verstappen won it on a reasonably comfortable clip from Lando Norris in second and Sergio Perez in third. So in case you were wondering, Verstappen won the sprint championship too, in case anyone was keeping score on that front. But yeah.
Lando got pole for the sprint. You want to know how long it lasted? It didn't.
Yeah, precisely.
Instantaneous.
Within 200 yards, Verstappen was in front. But I mean, we've now had the sprint for 3 years now. It's the end of year 3. And again, I think there's been a lot of complaints and a lot of noise about this format. And look, I said I put in my notes here, should it be scrapped? And look, the realistic answer is it will not be. And I think a lot of people need to understand this, that, look, F1's put you in a bit of a honey trap here because it's moved the session you care about to Friday evening. And if you're an F1 fan and you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're going to watch that session. And that's the numbers they're going to come out with when they justify this format. Because, yes, moving qualifying to a Friday night and having the sprint weekend on a Saturday, people will watch it. It's more meaningful than a practice session. So that's the numbers that they are going to cite when people look at the reports at the end of the year and go, well, the fans hate it. Well, you're still watching it, and that's what they're looking for. So
that's all. That's the only thing that matters to them is, does it bring more ratings, yes or no? Yes, it stays.
And this is even considering that, like, Friday's a work day for most people.
Yeah. And there was
but then it's doubly so, RJ, because people would normally just forego watching FP1 or FP2 entirely because they're at work. Instead, they're going to be sickos and they're going to sneak F1 TV onto their phone and they're going to sneak watching it.
Pop it on a second window in one computer in one screen while you're doing your CSR job on the other screen.
Keeping my iPhone in my textbook during class.
Yeah, the point is people are going to go out of their way to watch it because you care about it.
It matters.
It matters.
It makes a session that is purely for setup. Well, it replaces that with a mini race. And that's always just going to matter more to viewers.
Yeah. So we know that this is not going away anytime soon. Is it good the way that it is?
Not especially, no.
I'm fine with it for the most part. I don't look. People think that it's cool to hate the sprint. I'm indifferent to it for the most part, in the sense of the action itself was good. Ironically, the Brazilian sprint was better than the Grand Prix this weekend.
The Brazilian sprint's usually pretty good in the times that they've had the sprint in Brazil.
I'll go one further. I think the sprint has had more hits than misses this season. A little bit of rain-assisted help in a couple of places, but Austria's sprint was good. Belgium's sprint was good. I enjoyed Qatar's sprint. I enjoyed Brazil's sprint. If you're hitting 4 out of 6 in motorsport, you're doing pretty well, in my opinion. I actually genuinely enjoyed the slate of sprints we got this year. I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't. Now, I still think the sprint has one big overriding problem, and I think the biggest problem with it is that it gives too much away. It gives the game away a day early, and you kill some of that.
We saw that this weekend.
Yeah,
we saw that this weekend because
as well.
Yeah, we saw, okay, if this person gets into second, we'll see Verstappen be troubled for a few laps, and then Red Bull begins to flex their racecraft muscle. And that's exactly what we saw. The intrigue came elsewhere, where we had a very different grid, sprint to non-sprint this weekend. Aston Martin had completely different fortunes. AlphaTauri, huge in the Constructors' Championship for them, had completely different fortunes. Yuki Tsunoda is cooking.
Yeah, 5 points this weekend. A sixth place in the sprint. So
He's not cutting his hair. He is not cutting his hair.
My man is cooking. The only reason he wasn't actually able to make a lunge at Hamilton during the race, he was nursing a clutch issue. Still got it home in ninth. And should have been better for Daniel Ricciardo, but again, in that first lap melee, caught a rear tire to the rear wing and was never really a factor as he came out one lap down.
Williams needs to watch their back these next couple races.
7 points between them.
It's only 7 points. That could be evaporated pretty soon.
Yeah, this B-spec AlphaTauri, this car they introduced in, I want to say Singapore, it's got something.
It's got something. Yeah, I mean, it's that and the way I see it, I mean, the rumors are with the sprint, to get us a little bit back on topic here. The rumor is that there is talk that after the season is over, what they might do is that they might move the sprint qualifying to the shootout to Friday night, then move Grand Prix qualifying to that Saturday afternoon slot where the sprint is, and just shuffle that around a little bit so that, you know, you've got Grand Prix qualifying on Saturday, but you have the sprint race to open the morning proceedings. I don't really have a big preference either way. I don't have a strong opinion on it one way or the other. I didn't mind the shootout being sprint Saturday. I think it
organizes the weekend a little better. I think one of the bigger concerns for me as well with the sprint is the fact that they go into Parc Fermé after one session.
It is a bit rough. Yeah.
Because I like seeing more cars fight. And the one setup session this weekend killed Mercedes, killed Ferrari, and left a couple of teams really down in the dumps when they probably shouldn't have been.
Yeah, I mean, when Ferrari and
some of that is on your setup and your simulation tools,
of course.
But other times you just get it wrong, and because it's a sprint weekend, you don't have a chance to fix it the way you would on a normal weekend.
But that's why they're talking about these changes, because they're talking about the possibility of reopening Parc Fermé after the sprint race is over to make setup changes. To make setup changes before Grand Prix qualifying hits on Saturday afternoon, and they shut that door again. So, yeah,
and I think that makes perfect sense because you get a real race stint, real race conditions to actually go set your car up in. We might have more teams be competitive that way.
Yeah, and look, if it were me, is it time? I mean, it's like, okay, there's a famous Top Gear clip where they're upgrading the Renault Aventine.
Here we go.
And
I know what he's gonna say.
And they do all the big work. You know, they put new brakes on it, new tires. They stripped it out. They get to a certain threshold and window, and then they say, and then Clarkson
says, it's Aventine. That's what they say.
Knock it the fuck off, O'Connell.
but Clarkson, who, in his infinite wisdom, turns to James and says, "At this point, would you kill me if I said power?"
It's the upgrading your car for that Gran Turismo event, and you finally decide to take the easy road and slap a Stage 4 turbo on that bitch.
Precisely, and it's the same where I'm going to say here, is it time for reverse grids?
It has been time for reverse grids because that's the way you make it not give away the game. You mix up the game. The problem that you'll get with that is there will absolutely be gamesmanship from those who have the ability to pass. Red Bull, as if Red Bull don't bounce against the limits of the regulations enough. The teams who know that they can pass, they'll game the system.
If you're a top team, you're not going to want this for obvious, understandable reasons. But for me, if you want to keep some degree of anticipation towards your Grand Prix on Sunday, and also incentivize the teams that are struggling a little bit, that they might be able to get some points by the number is up for debate. I personally said 12. I think if you reverse the top 12, so you don't have people tank the end of Q3. And I know Steve in our Discord ever said 15. I think that's a little too strong because people will just tank the end of Q2 to take a sprint pole. I think if you aim smack dab in the middle, I say if you reverse the top 12 slots and extend the scoring down to 12th place in general, so go 12 points for a sprint win, -1 down to 12th place,
But then you'd have to expand the Grand Prix scoring system with that.
Not necessarily.
No, we wouldn't.
No,
because you still have you basically get two. You get two totally different scoring systems because there's a lot more points on offer in the Grand Prix. Still, they're just staggered differently.
I do. But would you be paying points to the top 12 rather than the top 10?
Look, if that's easier or more convenient, fine. Extend the points down to 12th place.
You got to extend the points down to 15th for the Grand Prix.
I don't think you do.
I don't necessarily think you have to do that. I think the Grand Prix being worth more and then making it a bit more exclusive to score points, I'm largely fine with. I don't think you necessarily have to extend Grand Prix scoring down to 15th place. Look, I wouldn't mind. Agree. I wouldn't mind if it was like that in general, because I think the scoring system is for MotoGP, which already goes down to P15, is fairer anyway than Formula One's, and it still incentivizes winning above all else because of the way it's structured. But I think the current F1 scoring system is fine right now. I think it's fine as it is with 10 scoring and +7 on second for the win. I'm fine with that. So I don't necessarily think you got to blow up the Grand Prix scoring system either, even though, again, I wouldn't have a big problem with it if you did. I just think that you've got to you balance the books a little bit better for the backmarker teams who are taking the sprint as a glorified test session anyway. Give them a little bit more of an incentive to show up and try and score some points, and we'll see if that changes. I think that's an easy way of doing that, personally. That's how I look at it.
I like the conclusion that we landed on was basically just like, yeah, Dora's doing this really, really good, which is not something we get to say often in 2023, but we did used to say it a lot like 3 to 5 years ago.
And they have their problems too. That's mostly injuring their riders through this dumbass going straight to 21 sprints a year format, but that's a discussion for another day.
We basically got confirmation that we're not going to get a healthy grid this year. Yay!
Yeah. More or less with the news that dropped a couple of days ago that Alex Rins will be missing 2/3 of the last triple header. He might be back for Valencia, the season finale, but he's going to miss Qatar and Sepang in the next races that are coming up. Speaking of which, that will remind us that our next episode will be on MotoGP. We are catching up on the last couple of weekends due to a certain colleague being a little bit on the ill side, bless his heart. But we're going to catch up on Phillip Island and Buriram when we get back on our next episode of M101. So that'll be a fun one. Formula One is back in a week and a half's time in Las Vegas for the first Las Vegas Grand Prix in, God, I want to say nearly 40 years. So that'll be fun, right? You know, Spider Pig on the wall as a track map.
Spider Pig on the wall, damn.
I can't wait for them to start making overtakes through Top Golf.
Look, I have been there. I have been in that Top Golf. It would be a banger, let me tell you. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. So, Formula One back in a week and a half's time. MotoGP up next. That'll be obviously this weekend at Sepang for the first of their final round of triple headers. But that'll be our next episode as we catch up on the two-wheeled side of things. But until then, I've been Dre Harrison. They've been RJ O'Connell and Cam Buckley. Until next time, thank you very much for listening. Sayonara.
Ryan Blaney saved at the pump.
The pump?
The pump.
He saved at the pump.
Woohoo!